Swarm is something that almost kind of came out of nowhere. I think if you've really been tapped into Donald Glover, if you've really been paying attention to the stuff he's been working on, you might have been aware of this, but Donald Glover and Janine Nabers have worked together before. They most recently worked
Mhm.
together on an episode in season 4 of Atlanta, which was called Work Ethic. That episode followed Van, the character of Van, played by Zazie Beetz, and her daughter, sort of navigating the machinations of an Atlanta film studio, which was certainly resembling things that we've seen out of Tyler Perry studios and productions
Mhm.
over the past, 20 or so years. And so she directed that episode. So clearly they were able to forge a relationship there and decided to co-create the series. Swarm had been something that, again, came out of nowhere, but once it did drop, got a lot of people's attentions due to the subject matter, due to the fact that, it's really a black fronted show with black creators, but it's also certainly referencing a lot of current topical trends in black music and black entertainment for certain. And so we definitely had to check out this new series. All 7 episodes, again, are available currently on Prime Video. This is another one we're going to spoil a little bit, but we're going to give our brief overall thoughts about everything that we saw out of this new series. So with all of that out of the way, I will pass it over to you. What were your general big picture thoughts about this new series, Swarm?
I am one of the people that absolutely knew Swarm was coming. I'm just a Donald Glover fan, so I'm always pretty tapped in everything he has going on. But it did drop relatively quick in terms of like everyone's like Swarm is out. I'm like, what? Wait, for real? Swarm is out? So I wasn't ready for Swarm to be out. I got reminded by like Prime Video commercial or something. But man was already to watch it, man. We have been talking about Dominique Fishback a couple times on this show, right? Between what's the power? Is that the name of that movie? Her and Jamie Foxx, Power
Oh,
something.
Project Power on Netflix. Yes.
Project Power on Netflix. We talked about Dominique Fishback there. She's going to be in the upcoming Transformers movie. So I was pretty excited to see what she was going to bring to the table in this show in particular. And boy, did she show up and show out, man. This is her project. This is Dominique Fishback's show. This is all her almost all the time. The camera is almost and always on her, man. This show was very unexpected. Again, I knew Swarm was coming out. I did not know what it was about per se. I did not know a ton going into watching it. But man, what a surprise it was. This TV show is a mix between social commentary and just I think the the psyche and I guess the examination I think of in the psyche of stan culture, of course, and what that looks like, what violence looks like, particularly from a black woman. And it explores all of those things and all of those thoughts and impulses and what that feels and looks like, man. I'm glad somebody made a project like this because I think it's something that that hasn't really been talked about in popular culture, not movies, not a lot in music either. A lot of people will tweet about it, but not a lot of people will make like a TV show about it. Like, here's a TV show about stan culture, guys. But Donald Glover and Janine Nabers was like, nope, here you go. Here it is, right here, man. I think it's so well done. I think it's patient when it needs to be. I think it focuses on mental health when it needs to focus on mental health. And not only that, but they do this really cool thing where every episode includes like a celebrity that has to do with music that is like low-key disconnected from music or disconnected from the music they're talking about in the episode, but has to do with the culture that they're speaking about. It's really interesting when you sit and think about it, the ways in which they do it. But man, I'm glad this exists. I really love the series. A lot of meta moments that I appreciate, and also moments where that made me question how people I think are perceived, you know what I mean, in ways in which they maneuver. But man, the cinematography is amazing. I love the music that they have. I love the intentionality to location, it being in Houston. Ding ding ding. I was like, I love all the small details about it, man. But yeah, I really enjoyed myself watching it. I watched it, I guess technically 2 days, just because it got late one night. But man, I watched it pretty straight through with no qualms and not a lot of quarrels, man. It also gave that Atlanta feel too when you watched it. You talked about Gene Neighbors and Donald Glover worked together on I think 2 episodes, or specifically the one you were talking about, one episode of Atlanta. But man, it's it was a treat, I think, for this to come in a weekend that it did, where I feel like I didn't have anything to do either. It was a very quick watch for me, and I enjoyed myself, man. It's good.
So this series has a lot of hooks to it that I think would draw people in. If you're a fan of Donald Glover, that's one big reason, of course. The fact that it is a show centered on a lot of black characters, and of course, black creators are behind it. That's another reason. There's a lot of notable names in this series. Chloe Baelish, or excuse me, Chloe Baelish. I just combined two people. Billie Eilish and Chloe Bailey are both in this show, as well as Damson Idris, and Dominique Fishback is sort of on the rise right now. So there's some notable people a part of it. It had a lot going for it. I think just generating a lot of conversation, but most importantly, it's no secret that this is about a young woman obsessed with a pop star that's supposed to be an analog to Beyonce, right? And so that premise and just putting that out there is very obvious, and something that I think would just grab a lot of people to say, like, well, let me see what this is about, because Beyonce is the biggest pop star that we have. We know what fandoms and fan culture and all that stuff can look like. Let's see what it all unfolds and ultimately turns out to be. So there was no doubt that I was going to watch it, and I know a lot of people that have watched it. And overall, I thought it was really, really good for the most part until the end. I really liked there's 7 episodes. I really, really, really liked 5 episodes. I think 5 episodes uninterrupted are, pretty unassailable and super strong, and had me emotionally hooked and invested all the way through. The last portion of the show, the final act, so to say, which are the final 2 episodes, are where I think things became a little bit challenging and difficult. I don't think the same amount of focus was maintained in those last 2 episodes. Still good, certainly not bad by any means, but I definitely thought that getting to the finish line of the series and of the story that they were telling felt a little bit clumsy, and maybe leaned into some of the things that we experienced in Atlanta that I didn't care for as much, that they sort of brought over to here. And I think that maybe perhaps a reshuffling of the episode order, maybe an additional episode could have perhaps made me felt better about the ending, but I did find that by the end of it, it didn't quite stick the landing for me. But there is so much to love about it. There is so many different things that this show is trying to tackle, so many thematic elements, so many genres that it's also tapping into. So it's really admirable that you had something where it's almost a half-hour psychological horror dark comedy, but they're taking aim at some really big heady stuff. Like this is a lot to unpack, and I felt like for the most part they did a pretty great job at unpacking that stuff and really sort of diving into what this all could mean, what are the implications for what toxic fandom could look like, and how dark and how deep this could really go. But you can only do so much with about a half an hour or maybe 35 minutes per episode. There were some elements and some things that I think that they could have explored a little bit more, maybe tapped into some of the more deeper elements of these themes that they're trying to unpack and explore. I think that there was more canvas to play with that they didn't quite explore. So I don't know if there's going to be a season 2. It seems like that this is being presented as a limited series, so it might not be, but there could be more runway for this type of story. I think that there's a lot that they could explore if they so choose to revisit this IP. But let's talk about some of the details of the series in depth here. So if you've not seen Swarm yet, we're going to give a spoiler warning. I think we'll mostly avoid big plot points. Actually, no, that's not the case. The show's been out for a while. All 7 episodes are available. So we might just reference some things that actually went down, like some people that die or pass away or whatever the case may be. So just be forewarned. Again, use your better judgment. If you haven't seen it and don't want to know anything about it, we're giving a spoiler warning and we're going to dive into it. But I do want to start off with just sort of the premise of the show. The fact that we are following this young woman named Dre, who is obsessed with this pop star named Naija, who is certainly referencing an analog to Beyonce, Beyonce being our number one apex pop star right now and has been for, pretty much the past almost 25 years. And we get to follow this character, Dre, and just see her obsession unfold and see how that affects other people. We see the detriments and the dark side of that. But this is certainly pulling from real life. We know that fandoms exist. We know that stan culture exists. It's been certainly, I think, elevated and almost punctuated by the existence of social media and the internet. It's certainly been one of the things that's just been elevated by that, because we somehow have become a little bit closer to celebrities than we ever have before, although we're still maybe as far removed from them as we always have been. Well, what are your thoughts just around, just the place that we exist in now? The fact that, you have all these different fandoms that exist, and sometimes, you get people that are just obsessed about their favorite artist or their favorite thing, and blindly so, that they'll just defend them to the moon and back, even though somebody might level a reasonable criticism against them, or they just might not like them and prefer their
Mm-hmm.
music. I think a lot of us might have experienced that, where it's like, oh, I don't really like that person's music, and you just get drugged and attacked throughout all of social media. You will get gutted and quartered if you utter the words, I don't listen to this particular person, right? And so what are your thoughts just about how that exists within our current pop culture landscape, and how that's impacted by social media and just people's overall interactions with each other?
Man, there's so much to it, and really you could sit around and I think talk about stan culture and the cons about it and the things that make it scary. You could talk about all those things, I think, for hours, man. But the show in particular is about, I think, a girl who doesn't have much else to look at or look forward to than this pop star. They don't have much else giving them a comfort or a wrapping around them the way that, and again, in the show, Nija's music does. And I think that is true for a lot of stans as well, where the everyday people don't see them eye to eye, but their favorite artist has a lyric that's just meant for them, and that artist makes them seen. Man, stan culture really is, I think, the part of the of any fandom that, to me, is which when it becomes dangerous. I'm of the believer. I'm a fan, but once you're a stan, it gets a little creepy, right? I have to reference, I think, one of the episodes where they're interviewing a fan of Nija's, right? But it's funny. I'm pretty sure he has on real Ivy Park, which is hilarious. I'm like, ain't that real Beyonce Ivy Park he has on there? But they're talking, would you kill for this artist? Would you kill, low-key, would you kill for Beyonce? And he's like, no, it's too far, right? Right? Yeah, it's too far. I think like he has to constantly question himself if he would kill for somebody he doesn't even know. But it's because of the obsession with this person, with this being that they believe is so important to the world, that their sacrifice would be even more important than themselves. And I think that's just a very interesting place to be at. I think stan culture is something that I think needs to be reevaluated. And even, right, the origin of the term stan, everybody knows, comes from the Eminem song Stan, right? And I think even in that scenario and at that time, it's something that should have been evaluated, right? That's stan culture is something that needs to be talked about in something that it might not be too healthy. Swarm is based off a true story, right? At least parts of it are. Of course, there's the little excerpt in the beginning, right? Which is where we go, any events or people in this thing.
This is not a work of fiction.
This is not a work of fiction. Anybody who's mentioned or seems like they're supposed to be mentioned in this is intentional. They're very much doing a lot of this on purpose. And there are parts of this where you can read the news stories in real life, like through networks of Beyonce stans who really have committed murders such as this and in these ways. And so I think the conversation that should come out of the show could even be more important than the show itself sometimes, you know what I mean? And I think that is, to me, that's the takeaway of Swarm. Sure, it's entertainment. Sure, it is somewhat a work of fiction that has this commentary on the real world. But now what point do we sit down and say, okay, some parts of standum or being a stand are not okay, and evaluate and talk about that. So yeah, that's kind of where I sit with it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately looking at the shit, I hate stan culture, not a fan, never have been a fan. It's kind of ridiculous that anybody would go to the lengths of what certain people have gone to just for their pure adoration of anybody. It is really weird behavior to me. What I will say, though, is that I think there's a bit of a two-sidedness to it, because on one end, you get these fans who have just cultivated these communities and this idea, and they use tools like social media and things of that nature to help spread that message, whether it be positively or negatively. But simultaneously, you also do get artists that play into this idea of stan culture, and they build brands around it, and I think, yes, a lot of this series is supposed to be an analog of Beyonce. One thing that I think kind of faltered in the series, which I wish they did more of, I think I think it might have served the story better if it was more of an amalgam of multiple fandoms as opposed to being so fixated upon
Mhm.
Beyonce, because it's very much clearly meant to be Beyonce hometown references.
Yep.
As you said, Ivy Park stuff, like they're not making any secret about that. But there's others out there. You know, you talk about
Mhm.
the Hive or the Navy or the Barbs, like all of this stuff it has been commodified so much so by the artist to a certain extent where they kind of leverage
Mhm.
that to build off their brands and to build these empires around them. Now, I don't imagine any of them advocate for murder or harm done to other people. Like,
Right.
obviously, they wouldn't, but
Mhm.
you just have to think that that's going to be a natural outcome when you also sort of embrace this culture that does exist, you know, and you want to embrace certain aspects of it, the positive aspects of it, the aspects that are healthy, the aspects that are meant to uplift people, but there's an inherent dark side. And I think that this show is trying to examine like the inherent darkness that exists with those people that will take it too far. They will go to that next level, and they might not even truly understand that they've taken it to that next level. It could be something that they are a little bit unaware of, or even worse and even more dangerous, they're absolutely willing to just dive completely in and go to those dark places without a care in the world, without any regard for other people or human life or the consequences that come with that. So it's just such a weird thing, again, that I think social media is just only exacerbated over the past, you know,
Mhm.
20 or so years. Because before, you had people who felt this way, of course, and as you said, Eminem with that whole video, they probably wrote letters and popped up at random places, popped up at concerts or autograph signings and these weird things. But now with social media, you can't you can't just be a bystander anymore. You're getting pulled into it. Again, like I said, if you just say you don't like something or I'm not a fan of this, then all of a sudden you're fucking public enemy number one. It's like,
Mhm.
maybe I just don't like the song. Why do I have to have an agenda against Beyonce or against Nicki Minaj or against Rihanna or even like men? Men, they're staying culture with, you know, Kanye West or Drake. We've seen that too with these
For sure.
artists. And
Mhm.
I think that that's the part of it where it becomes just super just agitating to me, where it's like, wait a second, like why do I have to get pulled into this whole conversation about it? And I think a lot of people have gone through that. It's also funny too that Scream 6 just came out, and that movie is just like
Mm.
this in that sense. It's more about
That's true.
movies and cinema, but
Right.
it's the same example of people who have latched onto an idea, latched onto an IP or an entertainment product, and decided all of a sudden to kind of build a cult and religion around it, and they're willing
Mhm.
to take life for it. You know, so I
Mhm.
think these conversations that we're having in our current pop culture landscape are always super interesting. They get sort of meta and self-reflective in that way, and so to see this series take that and sort of turn it on its head with black music and black culture specifically is certainly something really, really interesting here. I
Yeah.
do want to talk about some of the stylistic choices within the show. Again, Janine Nabers, Donald Glover have worked together before. Atlanta is a show that we've talked about a lot here on the podcast. Has certain stylistic flourishes. It has certain creative choices that it made, especially in the third and fourth season, these final two seasons, which make it almost unlike any other product out there. You know, there's this element of surrealism that was integrated throughout a lot of Atlanta. There's anthology episodes which take place outside of our main characters and our main continuity. Sometimes it feels like we might be in an alternate reality altogether. Like this isn't
Mhm.
of current modern times. It feels outside of that. And I think a lot of Swarm plays with those same things. You know, you get many events that take place in the show that go to Houston circa 2016 or Atlanta circa 2018, but they're not meant to be in our own reality. They're sort of a separate reality. Now, a lot of movies and TV series do this all the time. Like these things aren't happening in the real world. This is meant to be somewhat of an elevated or heightened experience of our current modern times. But what did
Yeah.
you think about that deployment of that particular, you know, sort of that particular sort of set piece that was integrated throughout these different episodes? The fact that they didn't just directly reference actual celebrities, they decided to create a different celebrity. They decided to,
Mhm.
you know, sort of take us to places that feel somewhat similar, but they sort of exist in a parallel sort of different time period. Also, the fact that they explore multiple genres. You know, at times this felt like a dark comedy. At other times it was like a psychological horror. There was even an
Mhm.
episode that was like a true crime mockumentary, you know, so they were really going all over the map, you know, playing with a bunch of different styles. How did that work for you? Was it effective? And did you think that they actually, you know, sort of achieve what they set out to do to create something that felt familiar, but also just super different?
Yeah, I think to me the achievement in a lot of these things is the conversation, right? I think a lot for me, the mockumentary, first of all, shout out to the lady who was playing the main detective. I thought she was hilarious. Very job well done. I thought she was really pretty funny. But I think like an episode like that is the ways in which, we've been talking about a lot even recently. In shoot, Scream talked about it. We've talked about it. How these true crime things or these examinations of serial killers are now like the new thing, right? It's now like we go through periods and ages of the ways in which documentaries look or mockumentaries, and we've been seeing a lot of that recently. Now it's like, how do we have a conversation about, oh, this is not only just talking about this girl who might have killed somebody, but really the ways in which they felt like they needed to make a documentary about this detective chasing a serial killer, you know what I mean? Or like in making that entertainment and making that because that episode, to me, the mockumentary episode, is absolutely supposed to be funny. There's just moments where she looks at the camera and it's like, yeah, this is hilarious. Or she's like talking on the phone in the background and it's like, dang, y'all are staging it so well, because I feel like I've seen this somewhere else. That's why it looks so good. But again, I think whatever conversation can come out of that for us to say, ooh, maybe we should stop doing things like that, or things like that. To me, that's successful. Or so I usually like when people touch things like that. They don't always work for me. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they're always like the greatest thing in the world. Like, yep, that was the best creative choice ever. But I always usually like the conversations that they bring up, or at least the ideas that they introduce. And I think, to your point about this being maybe one or two episodes too short, I would have loved if I don't mind the episodes they include that do have those in it. Just give me a couple more episodes now that you spent all that time, doing something else. Give me a couple more episodes, getting back to the main story and getting back and wrapping this thing up, I think, in a way that's sound.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, because I do think that true crime mockumentary episode, which is episode 6, that is where, I don't want to say derailment, but that's kind of where the momentum of the series kind of came to a halt for me, because
Mm-hmm.
I understood what they were doing, I understood what they were going for, and it's meant to be ironic, it's meant to be funny, but also like at the same time, it's like, well, they have a point here. They're actually speaking to some real shit that's going on, but in a series that is so short, where you are emotionally attached to this main character and Dre after spending, the better part of maybe 2.5, almost 3 hours with him, and then to just take this pivot and this detour was an interesting choice. And in Atlanta, even, those episodes didn't always
Mm-hmm.
entirely work for me. Those were the episodes where very interesting ideas, very, very deep concepts that I would like to unpack, but I think that there might have been a better way to explore it with our main
Mm-hmm.
characters that we follow and associate with so much, as opposed to going with new people that we're meeting. Now, there were some episodes of Atlanta in season 3 and season 4 where we would just go off and have a different adventure with somebody, and I was totally into it because they were just like picking apart some really interesting stuff. It's like,
Yeah,
oh
they were.
yeah, like I really want to get deeper into that, like the Wigga episode, the rich Wigga, poor Wigga one,
Mm,
crazy
wow,
shit, right? Just
crazy.
great,
Yeah.
great episode. But again, I think it works in most regards, but oftentimes you might just find yourself sacrificing just what people have just
Mm.
come to know the show as. Now, I know Donald Glover, he clearly does not like to be boxed in. And I would assume Janine Nabers probably feels the same way, that they can just do it all and they can tackle all this stuff, which is totally that is totally fair. And I did love the fact that we did get so many genres. Like at first, the first couple of episodes felt dark and comedic, and I was very much here for that. I'm like, oh, this stuff is meant to be funny. Like I'm totally laughing. But then certain kills that happen later on, especially in episode
Mm-hmm.
7, where we see her kill, this girlfriend that she has with Kiersey Clemens, it's like, oh, that's really fucking dark. That's not meant to
It
be
was
funny at all.
scary.
It's super
Yeah.
scary and tragic, and
Mm-hmm.
she has reached the lowest of the low. And so I love that they can play with that tonality shift, because that's super important to see. Like, yeah, you might have associated with her to begin with. You might have a little bit of empathy for her situation, but by the end of it, you're not really supposed to. You're actually supposed to probably loathe this person. And we just
Mm-hmm.
talked about You a lot and how they're not doing that with Joe Goldberg in that show. They're making us
Mm.
constantly try to love him. And, this is a white man at the end of the day. So it's a lot different in our association with him, but they're not really doing anything to make us detest Joe. Like, we're actually kind of rooting for Joe. Here, they go the opposite direction. They're like, no, you shouldn't be liking Dre at all. She's very
Mm-hmm.
monstrous on the inside due to some personal shit. But let's talk about her more in depth and detail. Dominique Fishback, I mean, without her, there is no show. There is no Swarm. She carries this whole thing on her
Whole
fucking
thing.
back. Like
Hmm.
it's it's the one element of this show that you really can't take anything away from her. She absolutely is stellar in everything that she did and gives just such a complex, challenging, very dark and deranged performance here that I
Hmm.
just was not anticipating. I did not know she had this in her. Saw glimpses in other things that we reference. You know, you see glimpses in Judas and the Black Messiah, but she hasn't really
Hmm.
had the opportunity to lead something before. And now we get to see her step up to the plate and just absolutely eat up everything that she's giving. But again, to what I said earlier, both Janine and Donald Glover were very intentional in their design of this character. They told Dominique Fishback, like, yeah, don't really connect with any of the empathy that's within her. Like, don't try to find the humanness in this character. Find
Hmm.
the monstrous animalistic sides in her. I don't know if I entirely agree with that approach, but that's what they decided to do. And we saw it sort of evolve over the series and we saw how dark it got. But what are your thoughts? And we'll get to some of the specific things that she did and even some of these kills, which were crazy. But what are your thoughts just about everything Dominique Fishback brought to this role and just how she illustrated this whole performance?
Man, what a tremendous, tremendous job, man. I think, it is only March, but so far it probably is, one of the best performances in the TV show, that we've seen yet, just because she was so ingrained, I think, in what she had to do. Like you said, we get into the nitty gritty and some of the other things in a second, but there's it's not even a kill per se, but it's the episode where she goes and sees her family. Shout out to Leon, by the way, who was randomly in this.
So random.
I'd love to see him though. I was like, oh shoot, it's
You know,
Leon. It actually
Donald
made me
Glover
really
loves
happy.
doing that, like picking our childhood. Like Cree Summer pops up here, Leon,
Yes,
as you
Crease Summer
said.
too.
Yeah.
Oh my God, two legends, man. But that was just like that was an episode where she had to act. You know what I mean? Like she had to pull out everything, and you can tell she really did that, and especially like you say, you see glimpses of other characters, of other things we've seen her in. But the difference that this is, Dre doesn't feel like any character I've ever seen. Like, and I think to me that speaks to how well Dominique Fishback was playing this character. When you give us something that feels fresh and new and is this dark and is this also nuanced, right? Because once you learn about the ways in which she is and why she is, right, her family history and her obsession with Nija and the flashbacks between her and her sister and all these other things, even the first 3 minutes, the way she looks at Damson Idris in the eyes, I was just like, what are we doing here? The girl was
While
just acting.
while he's clapping Chloe's cheeks and
Right.
she just she's just staring this nigga down.
She's
It
just
was like you
staring him in the
automatically
eye.
knew something's wrong
I'm
with this
like,
girl.
yeah, like she is actually unhinged. Something's wrong with him too for looking back the way he did. But something in her is unhinged. I like where this is going, and yeah, I just like that idea. I think I agree. I don't know about the approach completely, but I do like the concept of just this girl that's just slightly unhinged. Like something's just wrong with her, and what that looks like when the world around her doesn't come for that. You know what I'm saying? She doesn't have the means, or the one person who held her afloat isn't there anymore to help her stay afloat anymore, and what that looks like. I think she just did a really good job of carrying those ideas out.
Yeah, the really pivotal moment where I think we needed this was when she came into contact with Billie Eilish's character and they had that sort of weird cult. And you get her really explaining a lot of just
Yeah.
her upbringing and just like
Ooh, so
where
good.
that was
Mm.
that's the performance right there. Like if we're talking Emmys, that's what you submit, right?
Yeah.
It's just so much
Hmm.
so much emotion. And this is really a person who the whole character is defined off of the relationship of what she has with her sister, the Marissa character played by Chloe Bailey.
Hmm.
Like everything that's designed here is coming and pulling from that, and the fact that I think, Nija and both Marissa's characters kind of represent these almost crutches that Dre has had to rely on her entire life.
Hmm.
And
Right.
so Nija is always distant because she's a superstar and can't easily be reached. Marissa was right there for her and always sort of in her corner. But once Marissa commits suicide in the opening episode and she no longer has that
Hmm.
person, we see the spiraling happening from then on. Like she just completely loses her shit. And I think that this just examines and opens up and unlocks this idea of just these really intricate roles that don't exist for black people and really black actresses when we think about it. I think
Hmm.
I think oftentimes when we talk about black women and how they act and just what we like to see them as. We always lean back and fall back into, oh, I want them to be strong and powerful and beautiful and sexy.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's typically what we always say, which is fine. You need those heroic figures, but we also need more than that. We need really challenging roles where you see people that are damaged and have trauma in their life and they come from
Mm-hmm.
broken homes and they're fucked up in the head. Like that stuff
Yep.
is real and exists and it's fair too. And here we have a character that Dominique Fishback brought to life where we just haven't seen much of this, where you get to see a person just go to the darkest depths of a place where it's like, oh my God, like she is absolutely deranged. And I think we need space for all this stuff to exist. As scary as it might be to see it unfold, you're seeing this person who just has so much trauma to unpack and also had like their growth stunts. It seems like they never really matured in the appropriate ways. It's just really fascinating to see all that stuff come to life and to see her really bring that performance to a different level and just a different type of style of what we haven't seen before. I do want to talk about just like everything that happened after, the whole situation with Marissa, her sister, and just like the stuff we saw. I mean, any sort of recollections on what you thought might have been the craziest moment that she did? There were a lot of them. I mean, there's a sequence where it's certainly referencing a real life event where Tiffany Haddish said apparently Beyonce got bit by somebody. I think it was at the Met Gala or something like that. And
that really happened.
Apparently that really happened. And there's a whole scene in here where she bites Nyjah and has to leave the club. Some of the kills are super gnarly. Like we talked about, her strangling Kiersey Clemens was really, really sad, but also like the stuff that happened on the road when she ran into the whole cult with Billie Eilish. Like what were some of the crazy moments that, probably just had you thinking like, what am I watching right now when you saw this all unfold?
Yeah, Billie Eilish cult was pretty up there. Also, shout out to Billie Eilish. She did pretty darn good, man.
She was really good.
She
surprised
really
me a lot.
I was like, oh shoot, especially the one-on-one, the oh man, what's your name? Snap, Dre. Oh, like crazy stuff right there, man. It was really, of course, it was Get Out-ish, right? But it was something else in Billie Eilish's performance that just felt like, man, this girl here, she's scary, dog.
I want to see more.
Yeah, I do want to see more for sure. That was one of the craziest parts though, just because the way she got hit by that car was like it's very seldom I think that we see like the after effects. Like she got hit by the car and then it like zoomed in on her face and her orifices bleeding. I just hadn't seen that very often, if at all, a lot of times when people get hit by a car. So that was crazy. I'm very curious about old boy who got locked in the freezer with the cake.
Jesus Christ.
I not only is that cake gone now, but I'm very curious, like, who found him? Did he get fired? What happened there? Another really funny moment after she bites Nyjah and runs away, the two dudes outside, and one of them was like, hey, you know who that was? That was the girl from Love and Basketball. I was like, wait, what? How did he get there? I thought that was funny. What else was a crazy kill, man?
There was I forget who she killed at this point, but it's one of the posters of the show where she kills a person and then you see her mopping up the blood and just the juxtaposition between the really red blood on the white floor. Just a scary fucking visual.
She didn't clean it all up.
No, she left some of it there, and it's like, wait a second, like how does this make sense? Like you're just gonna leave some of the DNA evidence behind, but that was a really striking visual. I remember that part a lot.
It was, yeah. There was also, oh man, the strippers and the old boy with the car.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God, what an intense part of the series, man. Very intense situation because I like knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew it and I felt it, and then it goes down, and even though I knew it was coming, it was still crazy to watch, man.
That was comedy damn near. Just how quickly she flipped the switch, right? Like it happened.
She flipped it
so suddenly where she just like, you heard like, oh, I don't like Nyjah, and it's like that's the fucking like red along. It's like Kill Bill, when Kill Bill is like ready to fuck somebody up and you see the red and you hear the music pulsating. That's what it reminded me of.
No, for sure, man. That was because she goes and strangles. Old boy was strangling her back. Like low-key, she's not supposed to be alive right now. Like I'm pretty sure her esophagus was close to being crushed or she was about to go to sleep and not wake up. But man, because it also felt That was one of the things that felt, although it was a crazy situation, to me, it felt realistic of something that could happen. It felt like people walk in, see you, and you as just a guy who doesn't like somebody who's low-key actually really trying to help these girls out ends up dead because of it. It's just, yeah, it felt realistic to me, but that was a really crazy moment for me. Although the kill wasn't like technically by her doing, I think it was crazy because it felt like it could happen, and that's what made that part one of the scariest kills for me.
Yeah, I think the Billie Eilish episode and just how everything played, it might be my favorite episode just because of how it builds,
I
but it
think it might be
also,
mine. Yeah.
yeah, it tells the story of Drea while simultaneously giving you the crazy shit at the end where she just is running motherfuckers over, like just she doesn't care, she's aimless with it. That might be my favorite, but also even at the end when we see her desperately trying to get tickets. Again, it gets so dark and horrific where she finds a scalper and she's willing to pay for tickets and she just takes him to the parking garage and just with no second guessing about it, just shanks him up in his car. And what scared me the most was not even the action itself, it was the blank look on her face. Like it was some Michael Myers shit. Like you can't even see the emotion behind this person's eyes. Like that's how far gone she is. So again, just absolutely phenomenal work by Dominique Fishback. It's gonna be one of those performances, like you said, we talk about. It deserves some recognition across awards bodies. If it doesn't get that, it's going to be some inherent bias there for sure because she was just absolutely stellar. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts about Swarm? Any other things you wanted to say or just, sort of acknowledge as it relates to this series? Do you want to even see more out of this type of story? Do you think that there might be maybe an anthology approach that they could take, or could we continue possibly with Dre's story? Because by the end of it, she's not dead. We don't see her get arrested. We don't see her get caught. I think with a lot of these, stories where we follow these murderous people, whether it's you or Barry or whatever the case may be, they typically are able to outrun the police or their captors or whoever for but so long, and then they're eventually either in jail or dead. Do you think that there could be more with the story of Dre, or do you think that this is going to be sort of the definitive ending for this character?
I think it's definitive, man. I think the fact that we've both seen that it's on Letterboxd now, which they don't usually give, entries to TV shows with multiple seasons, that I think this is it for that. I would like to see an anthology perhaps out of Janine and Donald, though, just because it feels like that's a show that feels like they feel like they should make. You know what I mean? They keep coming back with these little pockets, I think, of stories centered around whether it's Black identity or social commentary about Blackness or something, right? The reparations episode in Atlanta, we just talked about the Mr. Chocolate episode of Atlanta, even something like this, like Swarm, where it feels like it could fit in a world where it's just an anthology of different episodes. Black Mirror, whatever you want to call it, I don't know. But they're
Can we
always
pitch
so
that
interesting.
now? Black Mirror, I like that.
Black Mirror, yeah, man. It always feels so interesting, the things they're trying to talk about and point at, because I think a lot of those conversations would be better had in that format sometimes, you know what I mean, versus in the middle of some of these TV shows. So I would be interested if they did something like that to move on. But I think this is the end we see of Dre. I think the ending is ambiguous on purpose. I think the conversation we're having now was what they wanted. The conversation about part of it being real, part of some of the kills. I know one of the most real kills that Janine literally talked about on I think it was just a regular interview, but she was talking about her and the KRC Clemens situation, how realistic that was of
terrifying
a situation, which makes that 30 times scarier of what's going on there. They ended up in the woods. It's just a lot going on there. But I think those conversations are what they wanted. I just hope they find other ways sometimes to tell these stories in the avenue. Yeah, and I think an anthology show in itself could really help, I think, blossom a lot of those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, more collaborations, please, from Donald and Janine. They obviously work really well together. They are tackling some of our most prominent, Black iconic entertainers, and doing so in a way that's creative, and it doesn't feel it doesn't necessarily feel like they're punching down all the time, you know, on the actual celebrity themselves, maybe on their fans. I think that might be more of a thing. Like, hey, if you enjoy Tyler Perry shit, you might want to reconsider that. Or if you're such a stan of Beyonce, you might want to reconsider what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they are unpacking some really interesting stuff that should be talked about, and there should be conversations about, and just more of this, more psychological stuff that's exploring Black characters and Black stories that we just don't often see. We don't always get to see the opportunity for really talented people to come and play something that's just so complex, can also be so divisive as well. And I think that's good and healthy. I think that we can have more of these opportunities to where we're not all unanimously just praising somebody for being heroic. Like, there's just so much more depth and so many more layers that you can go, so many more places you can explore. So I hope that they do collaborate in the future and maybe, you know, just do another project, even if it is unrelated to Swarm, and they just, you know, decide to tackle something entirely new. I would totally be here for that. But folks, those are our thoughts on the new Prime Video series Swarm. If you've checked out all 7 episodes, please hit us up and let us know what you think.